Experts are predicting that secondhand shopping could overtake the fashion industry in the next few years. Led by Gen Z, more of us than ever are choosing to buy our clothing secondhand rather than brand new. We're going to break down the reasons why pre-loved clothing has suddenly become so much more attractive to many of us, and the reasons why, despite this progress, it doesn't guarantee the end of fast fashion or overconsumption. So let's get into it. Hi, I'm Katie. Welcome back to this channel. I talk about sustainable fashion, overconsumption, social media, personal style, and a lot of corresponding topics. If that sounds interesting to you, then please subscribe, like this video, and follow me on my other social media. I wanted to make this video because I've been seeing a recent influx of headlines and reports promising that the number of people buying secondhand is soon going to eclipse the people buying first-hand fashion, which sounds amazing to me as a sustainable fashion lover. Some recent examples of these statistics is one claiming that secondhand clothing is on track to take 10% of global fashion sales this year in 2025, and Gen Z are largely responsible for that growth. If we look at recent TikTok culture, this kind of tracks. Not only are specific trends cropping up that directly reference secondhand fashion, for example, you had mob wife trending this time last year, which encouraged people to find vintage fur coats, or back in September last year, you had videos that had hundreds of thousands of views promoting gorgeous secondhand vintage suede jackets, with people also talking about how they were such better quality than what was available on the market firsthand at the time. Not only are we seeing it in specific trends, but the macro trends for Gen Z right now are arguably personal style and individualism, both things that lend themselves very well to secondhand and vintage shopping, rather than clicking a link in bio and buying exactly what everyone else is. According to Pinterest Predicts 2025, vintage maximalism is already trending. And I think we can also see these macro trends reflected in the recent interest in brooches, bag charms, Jane Birkifying our bags so that they look more pre-loved and worn in. This shift towards pre-loved seems to be a global phenomenon. Americans are definitely embracing the change, but British people seem to be obsessed with it. A recent study showed that 10% of British people aim to make the majority of clothing they bought in 2024 secondhand. And more people than ever in the UK are making secondhand fashion their first point of call, which are both insane statistics. I don't want to get too bogged down in giving you reports and numbers that are hard to contextualize, but they're all kind of promising this same progress towards sustainability and moving away from buying new things all the time, which is great to hear. But this doesn't exist in a vacuum. And although more people than ever are choosing to shop secondhand, brands are still churning out styles relentlessly and doing their best to convince us that we need to buy as much as possible. This is proving successful as the take, make, waste model hasn't disappeared from consumer shopping habits, which has big impacts on the resale market that is trying to thrive in a fast fashion mentality. For example, resale platform thredUP receives upwards of 100,000 garments a day in the US. And this is just one resale platform of the many. Vestiaire Collective reports that every day more than 30,000 new items appear on their platform. Despite the fact that more of us are choosing to shop secondhand, our mentality towards new clothing hasn't changed. And we're going to be exploring this issue and more later on in the video. But first, let's talk about why secondhand has become more popular. Throughout the video, I'm going to be slotting in insights from my wonderful chat with Emily from Pre-Loved podcast. She's been talking about secondhand fashion for around 15 years. And our talk dissecting secondhand fashion growth, dupe culture, and the fashion industry as a whole is going to be available on my podcast, Refashioned, in a couple of days for you guys to enjoy. But on to the next section of the video, which is understanding why secondhand fashion is getting more popular. I'm going to call these the 5 A's because it's fun. The first A is affordability, and arguably the biggest reason why people are turning towards secondhand fashion.
Throughout history, there's research that shows that secondhand fashion kind of tends to boom in periods of economic recession. So like we did see that in 2008 and in 2020 briefly, and that could be part of the reason why we might see another continued boom of secondhand fashion coming up in 2025. And I think the big reason for that is because if we look at consumer research about why people adopt to secondhand fashion, the low price point is the number one reason pretty consistently across consumer research. And then, there's things like the value for money, like the durability, the product quality, the uniqueness. Sustainability tends to be lower on the list, more of like kind of a gift with purchase.
The second A is accessibility. Online resale platforms have changed the game when it comes to secondhand shopping. Given that almost anyone can access them, online resale is expected to grow up to 2 times faster than the secondhand market overall by 2027, reaching a valuation of around $38 billion. Not only are more people able to access secondhand online, recent developments are making curated secondhand a thing. You have AI shopping tools which allow you to search through items really easily. You have Google plugins that search the web when you're trying to buy something firsthand and offer you secondhand instead. And many platforms are working on better categorization for their items so that you could search something like Vanilla Girl into Depop and the algorithm will show you curated items that match that specific aesthetic without the lister having to tag it as that in their description. Not only does this save time for consumers trying to get through the sheer amount of items available on resale platforms online, but it also stops people feeling overwhelmed by all that inventory, which are 2 major blockers to many when shopping secondhand. The third A is an altered perception around secondhand now being a symbol of uniqueness or personal style. I was definitely trying to fit that into the A's format. I'm not sure if it came off right, but it goes back to what I was saying about TikTok macro trends now leaning towards individuality and showing off your ability to find unique stuff and style it in a way that other people aren't doing.
I think there will always be mega influencers, but I do think I'm seeing like a desire for more of that like indie tastemaker.
The fourth A is pre-loved fashion, offering an alternative approach to the status symbols that Gen Z are becoming interested in as we grow up. TikTok is obsessed with luxury dupes that give you the perception of wealth without the price tag. But recent studies show that some members of the generation are turning away from cheap dupes in favor of buying these luxury symbols secondhand or vintage instead, keeping that affordability but getting quality in return. As Emily covered in a tweet, why you would buy a dupe of something when a secondhand or vintage version of it exists is a mindset that Gen Z is apparently starting to adopt. This is reflected in an article I read called "How Does Gen Z Define Luxury?" According to the article, the definition of luxury amongst Gen Z is shifting away from dupe culture, with Gen Z instead gravitating towards luxury resale platforms like The Real and paying for the privilege of seeing items ahead of others in order to get the best deals. According to one Gen Zer, paying the $12 subscription fee to The Real's First Look program is worth it because it allows users to shop 10,000 plus new items daily, 24 hours before anyone else, even if it involves checking through 17 pages of new arrivals twice a day to constantly ask yourself, am I missing something? The fifth and final A is acceptance. And I think this is because fashion overall is embracing secondhand. I reported back in September last year that the SS25 catwalks were a big month for secondhand. Events throughout the Big Four celebrated pre-loved, with London and New York hosting specific pre-loved catwalks. There's also been this shift culturally on the TV and media we've seen recently too. For example, Love Island, a British dating show, has just announced they're renewing their partnership with eBay, which they initially did after sacking off the fast fashion sponsorships from previous years. And of course, Emily in Paris's latest season featured a whole plot point around resale platform Vestiaire Collective. Just listening to those points and some of the stats I gave earlier, you would be forgiven for thinking that secondhand fashion is emerging as the perfect solution to our fast fashion obsessed society. But I think there's a lot more to it, and we need to get into some of the reasons why the boom in resale isn't quite as simple as the headlines and reports make it out to be. Now, I don't have a fancy 5A system for this. It's going to be a little bit more messy as we break down the various issues around something that is complex. But my first point challenges that initial belief that secondhand is an alternative to fast fashion. Despite the fact that secondhand is often shown as a similarly priced alternative to fast fashion, Emily points out that public opinion isn't always for one or the other at any given time.
When secondhand fashion rises, in recent history, fast fashion has risen too. So they like tend to rise in parallel with each other. Because like even if you think about 2020, like I feel like there was also a big boom in fast fashion saturation. So I think like that's the one thing to contextualize, because we talk a lot about how like secondhand is proliferating everything and the industry is booming, and it totally is, but it's not eclipsing fast fashion yet. So we still have to figure that out. Like we have to figure out how to get it to not be about just simply consuming more.
The other idea I kind of want to challenge is that secondhand fashion is always a golden ticket to sustainability, especially when people turn to it as a way of maintaining their overconsumptive habits whilst believing that they are being sustainable because the clothing is already produced. The easiest example of this is the fact that we took fast fashion hauls, which are so popular on TikTok and other platforms, and shifted that over into secondhand finds instead, often with the message that this was the more sustainable approach. And many sustainable fashion creators like me, like Emily, have held our hands up and said that we've participated in this trend before, maybe without realizing the overconsumptive message it continues to perpetuate. One of the points I kind of want to break into a little bit more from the reasons why secondhand is booming was that idea of Gen Z turning from dupe culture to secondhand or vintage. Whilst the article I referenced suggested that this behavior is becoming increasingly more accepted by the TikTok generation, I think we're yet to see a mainstream shift away from dupe culture. And the Walmart Birkin or Workin is a great example of this, and only reaffirms that point about secondhand not stopping people from also buying fast fashion. Even if we solve those first two problems and we got people to not only completely cut out shopping fast fashion, but also cut down on their purchases overall, the current resale market does have issues outside of people's buying habits. For example, the rise of fast fashion, poor quality clothing not only affected our own wardrobes, but it has also affected the quality of resale fashion available to us. For years, many of us have been lamenting the fact that charity shops just aren't hitting as well as they were. And a large majority of that is because they're flooded by our fast fashion cast-offs, or the brands themselves are giving clothes that haven't sold in store to the charity shops so they can write it off for tax. It begs the question, does anyone actually want to buy secondhand Shein? And is the general state of clothing nowadays conducive to the resale market at all? The most popular brands in the resale market, according to one report, include Patagonia, Lululemon, Reformation, and the North Face. Brands that teeter on fast fashion, but are certainly not the posters for fast fashion that we would think of with the term. And yet, those aren't the brands flooding the resale market. According to statistics from last year, the resale platform Vinted had 61.8 million items from Zara, 59.7 million items from H&M, 21.8 million items from Shein, and 21 million items from Primark. These figures point to the idea that fast fashion just doesn't sell as well secondhand. And yet, those are the brands that are overwhelmingly available on resale platforms. Some platforms have taken controversial approaches to address this, like Vestiaire Collective banning fast fashion from their website a few years ago. One of the biggest criticisms for this was, if we're not even giving these fast fashion items a chance to resell, then where do they go? Will they just end up in landfill and recycling centres, which are already sounding the alarms because their infrastructure can't deal with the sheer amount of clothing they're being sent as we continue to buy more and more? From a resale platform business's perspective, the secondhand market is hard to turn a profit on. Only last year did Vinted report its first profitable earnings, despite being a massive name in the industry for years now.
The thing about secondhand is it's a very labor and time intensive industry. Every single thing is one of one SKU. And so, I mean, that's the nut that all of these big resale platforms are trying to figure out how to crack.
Despite this, there's definitely hope in the industry. More and more brands are looking into resale options as consumers show more interest. And in response to recent reports promising that this interest is only going to increase, more than 1/3 of retailers said they would be encouraged to cut new production if resale proved to be successful. Although I think it's great that more and more reports and headlines are talking about how resale is booming and more people are interested, and I'm excited to see how that pans out in the next few years. I also think it's really important that we increasingly talk about the context behind the boom in resale and whether it is actually providing a sustainable alternative, or whether it's enabling us to keep some negative consumptive habits under the guise of doing better for the planet. One thing that comes to mind throughout this topic is the idea of a systems change that we need in fashion. How redesigning around a broken system is just going to lead to more problems in the end, and how the better alternative would be to break down the system and start from scratch. And I think we can definitely see some parallels here with secondhand fashion offering an alternative to fast fashion that still relies on current newness and trends and overconsumption. So yeah, I think those are my sentiments behind it. I'd love to hear what you guys thought of the topic, and I'm excited to share the interview with Emily when it comes out. Like I said, I'll be linking it in the description, putting it on my social media channels, so make sure you're following me so you can see that. And I'd love it if you could give this video a like if you enjoyed it. And yeah, I'll speak to you really soon. Have a lovely day. Bye.